But as far as slut shaming is concerned, to a certain degree, I agree that, you know, there needs to be more shame in general. Shaming tactics, you know, are actually quite valid, because I think that people need to learn or relearn what it means to feel ashamed of themselves.
Well, Eagle Eye, the last sort of 10 minutes or so of your half-hour-long video, you discuss slut shaming, or ostensibly you discuss slut shaming, but you really don't. You discuss the utility of shame as regards its function in society, and how shame can be a useful tool to basically coerce people into conforming to the status quo. Those weren't your words, but that's the gist of what you were saying. Now, on this subject, we both agree and disagree, but let me go off on what I disagree with you about first. You didn't actually talk that much about slut shaming particularly. You talked just as much, if not more, about, say, fat shaming people, which is something I'm going to ignore completely. As far as slut shaming is concerned, you made no effort whatsoever to identify what you think constitutes sluttish behavior. I've been asking people since I was in high school how they personally define the word slut. And almost every single person I've asked has a different definition. And although this is not universally true of all the people I've asked, it generally comes down to people tend to think of someone else as a slut if that other person has had more sexual partners than they have. That's my observation, that's my experience in the world, and I've been asking this question for more than 35 years of people. Basically, what constitutes a slut? Frankly, to me, the word is completely invalid. It's kind of like the word nigger. People tend to use it on one another as a weapon. Whatever meaning people think it has is relatively sort of subjective to the person who is wielding the word as a weapon. It has almost no value in terms of identifying what someone is, because, like I say, everyone seems to define what a slut is differently. Some people get called sluts just based on the way that they dress, irrespective of whether they're promiscuous or not. I know plenty of women who, say, have nice boobs or nice legs, and so they'll wear clothes which accentuate those features, and they get called sluts, typically by other women. And it's my opinion, based on many years of observation, that the women who call other women sluts because of those reasons are usually a bit jealous. I think jealousy plays a huge part in why people call other people sluts. That's the same when it comes to promiscuous behavior. I think some people who are promiscuous get called sluts not because there's any sort of moral value judgment being made against them as such. It's more of a jealousy argument. People wish they had what that person has in terms of their allure, and they're jealous of it. So in order to feel superior in some way, they call that person a slut. It's, in my opinion, it's kind of transparent, and it's very weak as well. Furthermore, I would also argue that there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of in being promiscuous whatsoever. Are you kidding? Most people that I know would prefer to have sex as often as possible, assuming that person enjoys sex at all. And that being the case, having lots of sexual partners may or may not suit everybody, but for people who feel comfortable with that, who the fuck is anybody else to tell them that they're wrong or that they're behaving irresponsibly? The act of sex, in and of itself, is completely devoid of any moral aspect. Immorality and sex only come together when other factors are involved, like if you have to lie to someone, say, for example, tell them that you're not married when you really are, or tell them you make more money than you really do, or tell them, you know, that you love them when you really don't. That kind of thing. Then sex can be immoral because you're manipulating someone into the position of having sex with you. But the immorality doesn't exist in the act of sex. The immorality exists in the act of deceit, which leads to the sex. Having a lot of sexual partners, whatever that means, however that's defined by each individual, is completely devoid of any moral wrong, because you're not actually hurting anybody by fucking them. And certainly you're not hurting anybody who you're not fucking at all. So what does anyone else's sex life have to do with someone who's not involved in it? Slut shaming is no different than homophobia in a way. It's a kind of prejudice that people have about someone else's privacy, which they don't really have a right to have. I mean, you can argue that you have a right to your opinions, and on that level I would agree, but you don't necessarily have the right to throw your opinions at other people without due cause. Right? Unless someone provokes a response from you, keep your fucking opinions to yourself. Keep your shame to yourself. Now, where I would agree with you is that shame does have some utility, or guilt, you might say, has some utility in terms of social cohesion. In other words, how people manipulate one another in subtle ways through, say, social shame to advance society and make society more cohesive. A good example of that would be racism. Affirmative action did less to overcome racism than the social pressure that exists, because we now are quite comfortable making racists feel ashamed for openly expressing their racism. Racists still, quite honestly, have the right to their opinions and a right to express themselves, and those of us who disagree with those opinions have every right to make them feel ashamed. And hopefully, over time, as I think is evident, that shame has reduced the overall level socially of racism in our society. Of course, it's not gone away and probably never will completely vanish. You're always going to have racists. But as long as that social pressure exists in terms of shame, there is a mitigating factor against it spreading and getting out of control, which would cause a lot of social unrest, as we have seen in the past. But what is there about being a slut, or being promiscuous, if you prefer, which is what I would prefer to call it, which is hurting anybody? How does anyone's sex life affect anybody who's not involved in it? So what is there to be ashamed of? You tell me.
Now, on the slut shaming thing, you know, it is a fact that the more people you sleep around with, the greater your chances of contracting some sort of venereal disease or STD.
Well, the things you list off, like sexually transmitted diseases, and I didn't include it there, but you also mentioned unwanted pregnancies and so forth. What any of that has to do with people becoming victims of rape is a fucking mystery to me. So please do enlighten me. How does someone's promiscuous behavior lead to them being the victim of a rape? Please tell me how the two are correlated. Not even correlated so much, but how one causes the other. If someone is promiscuous, that does not entitle anyone to think that they have a right to have sex with that person just because that person is promiscuous. That person still has free agency and can fuck who they want and cannot fuck whoever they don't want to fuck. Right?
And to be honest with you, I would rather have a society where people are shamed into proper behavior by social proof, rather than having a society where people's behaviors are controlled by a totalitarian, all-powerful government.
Well, Eagle Eye, I think we already do live in that kind of a society. I think social pressures of guilt and shame have done much more to mitigate against homophobia, racism, and other forms of prejudice than any amount of legislation ever could functionally do. So I'm not saying legislation has no place in these realms, but generally speaking, I think it's less effective than the social pressures that you're talking about. I agree that shame can be used for good in society. However, I don't agree that it's appropriate when it comes to this topic. People's sexual behavior is their own business. As long as they're not hurting anybody else or adversely affecting society with their own personal choices, be that choices in how they present themselves physically or how they behave privately. As long as it's not hurting anybody else. We can have opinions about it, but we've got no right to make anybody feel ashamed about it because they're not hurting anyone. It's absent of any moral deficiency, and therefore there's no need for shame. That's my 2 cents. I want to thank everybody for watching this video and putting up with all this. Until next time, may all your ups and downs be ups.